Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest installment in our UXDX Online series. And each week we're running multiple sessions like these around the world in different time zones to try share some new ways of working, new insights, and ways that you can help improve the ways that you are working on your teams. We have two amazing speakers lined up today, but before we jump into those, I wanted to give a very quick introduction to what it is that we do at UXDX and why we run these sessions. So our mission at UXDX is to help companies shift from working in projects, waterfall projects, to more empowered autonomous product teams. And the reason why that's our mission is that we believe in high change environments, that it is a more effective, a more efficient, and a more sustainable way of working. But what I kind of caveated that at the start was I said in high change environments, because we recognize that it's not one size fits all. My past experience of being kind of forced to use waterfall methodologies when it just did not make sense for the projects that I'm working on, I know viscerally that there isn't one size fits all. And that's the same with anything. So how we kind of say it is, if you're in a low change environment, there's no point having the overhead of a team just sitting there waiting for some changes to come along or inventing changes. But if you're working in a high change environment, it makes sense to have a continuous team because they can learn about the needs of the business, the needs of the customers, and really get that kind of deep understanding of what's needed to be developed and keep iterating and improving on it. But one of the challenges, that's nice and easy to say, but one of the challenges with that is that in a kind of waterfall world, you might have your architects, you might have your kind of senior designers, and then you have your interaction designers, your UI designers, your front-end engineers, your back-end engineers, your data engineers, your QA, your automated QA specialists. I think I counted up to 20 different roles of specialists who had worked on a project that I was working on. But if you move to a cross-functional team, you're only kind of having a maximum around eight people is kind of seen as the upper limit or the best limit to put on a team. So how do you reconcile that 20 specialists with 8 people? Is you move to what's known as kind of T-shaped or pie-shaped, cone-shaped skills, where each person has their core area of speciality, but they also need to know a lot about what other people are doing across the team so that they can help out where needed and be able to cover not as well as a specialist, but enough to be able to get out of any pinches or areas where the team needs help. And that's why we run these sessions at UXDX. So we invite product, UX, design, and dev to attend because we want people to start working on those cross-functional, kind of the broad T-shaped part of the skill set. And the other thing that we ask our speakers to do is, it's great to know the theory of something, that, oh, this should work and this is how things should work. but often the devil is in the detail of when you try to put it into practice. So we ask our speakers to share some examples of where things have gone wrong, or how they've overcome the challenges of moving from that theory to actually putting this into practice. And yep, finally, it's just, if you have any questions, please do ask them. So we have some amazing speakers here today sharing their knowledge, but there's always some areas of doubt that is left, or something that's not quite clear. So please do ask, and the speakers are more than happy to answer your questions. But if we run out of time for all of your questions, we also have the Slack channel, our Slack community, the UXDX community, where there's the channel Ask the Speakers, and we can ask some questions there as well. But that's it for my introduction. So I'm not the reason why you're here today. You're here to learn from our amazing speakers. And up first, we have Jim Morris, who's the founder of Product Discovery Group. And he's going to be talking about how to innovate with quick experiments. So this is something that I'm always really passionate about and always wanting to learn more. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Jim. Hi, Jim.
Awesome. Thanks, Rory. How are you doing? Can you hear me all right?
Yep. And everything should be up and running and ready for you to go. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Perfect. So today we're going to focus on 3 simple words: innovate, quick, and experiments. And it should be a lot of fun. So just background on me. I'm a Stanford computer science major graduate a long time ago. Started my career selling sporting goods online back when Amazon only sold books. That company went IPO. Then started a company that was a product reviews platform, and we sold to our competitor. And then the federal government considered us a monopoly since we were 1 and 2 in the market. And so we were spun out. And after that 10-year experience in product reviews, I went out on my own as a product management coach. And so though I started in engineering, I'm here in the product world because this is where we're defining what's going to be the next great product. So I also teach at Berkeley. Right now I'm coaching consumer organizations, a lot of digital health organizations, and then a grouping of tech development tools, financial tech, and other companies. It's at the organization, the squad, and the individual level. So what do I see out there in the world? I see a lot of building. Build, build, build. Okay? And in that process, people are really falling into what I call the product discovery valley of death. And this is where you have great ideas, but you don't test them. And when you don't test them, there's the risk of people not adopting them, not seeing value. You may have great ideas. You may have interviewed folks, but you haven't taken the solutions back to those folks to really see if they would use them. And so today it's all about these quick experiments for innovation so that you do this solution testing step and you avoid the valley of death. Okay, so let's start with the story of an entrepreneur who spent $200,000 building a website that nobody went to. And he had found an outsourced company to build his dream idea. But the issue with the dream idea is that he wasn't able to market it and didn't quite understand what people would see value in it. It was valuable to him, but he hadn't done the research with others. And so when he came to me, we started from scratch. We built some prototypes to test what would people see in this website. And I'll tell you what this website does. Imagine that you have a home project and you need a plumber or an electrician. Well, you have to go find somebody. You might be doing it online. A lot of people ask their friends or their family. The premise of this site was that you would ask your neighbors. And so how can you facilitate the asking neighbors? Well, you have to find them. What neighborhood are you in? And we tested the interest in this idea, and we tested how people could find out about it. And what we learned led us to create a very bare bones, no code website. So we started with fake prototypes, quick experiments, moved to the next set of quick experiments, which was to use a Squarespace site with Google spreadsheets and to drive traffic to that site from Nextdoor and Facebook groups. We'd learned about Nextdoor and Facebook as a large source of these plumber and electrician referrals from our customer interviews. When this site got too overloaded and we started to actually drive traffic, and you can imagine Squarespace plus Google Sheets is much cheaper than a $200,000 site custom. He then went on to a site using Webflow, another sort of more advanced no-code tool. Then he also decided that this market he needed to pivot his idea into a home services subscription service. So for plumber and electrician, whatever you needed, what about a monthly fee to have that taken care of? And so through these quick experiments, this entrepreneur was able to pivot and then grow his understanding of his market. And this was in a fraction of the time it took to build this other site that no traffic was going to. So again, quick experiments can help you innovate to get to the right idea. And so this is really what we're looking for. Instead of building all the time, it's learning, building, and then measuring. Of course, did you get that traffic? Did the outcome, did you make money? So really redefining product development here. Again, people are familiar with this is instead of ideas going to delivery, we're going to add discovery in. So today we'll talk about discovery as innovating with quick experiments. The first step, the first word is innovate. You really need your cross-functional team. This is important. What Rory said matters. As you get more folks on the team earlier in the process and you solicit their ideas, you're going to get a much richer set of ideas to start from. That might be in the problem space, that might be in the solution space, but you need this cross-functional team. I have clients that have a data scientist on every cross-functional team. I have clients that have doctors on every cross-functional team. So sometimes you need subject matter experts, sometimes data experts, somebody from customer support maybe. Again, Rory mentioned that team size of up to 8. I think that's great. You got to keep it low. There are T-shaped personalities that can help you if you have multiple specialties that need to be represented. Okay, so you need engineers. Most common problem I see is that folks create cross-functional teams, but don't drive engineer participation. And so what they're losing is what's just now possible. Really, engineers are one of our greatest sources of innovation. They can hear the problem and they can apply perhaps a new solution they've been thinking about or reading about, or one that might just come out of what their current work stream is. So the concept of just now possible is really important for teams. You might be missing this if you don't have engineers. So that innovate word's really important. So what are popular engineer started companies? Well, Google, of course, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple. So a lot of the most commonly used companies today had either all or more than half engineer founders. Okay, it's really important to make sure that you don't lose touch with your engineers. Keep them involved. Amazon took some just now possible technology, secure websites, widespread internet access to launch in the 90s. My company, Power Reviews, we were a product reviews widget inside of a site. We grew to 1,200 clients in 20 countries, all powered by iframes and Ajax. Tesla really started with this concept of long-lasting battery. So there are enabling technologies that allow certain companies to get over the hump. So what are we doing with engineers? We're doing collaborative solutioning with those data scientists, with those doctors, creating that team, really working up front together. So what does each individual do? Well, certainly you're contributing ideas. One of the best ways is to do sketching. So on that innovation side, I want you to innovate by drawing it, not just a designer. I want all of you drawing. These are examples of sketches. These are things that drive innovation when you have people write down their ideas and then you take these ideas to your users in lightweight forms. The Sprint book is a great resource for this type of activity. So I recommend checking this out. You don't need to do these things in 5 days. You can just take these exercises and apply them every sprint, every discovery cycle. Okay, so let's move on to quick. Quick is a lot of fun. We talked about innovation. Well, quick. What does quick mean? Well, here's a thought experiment. It's very quick. In 1921, a Swiss psychologist invented the Rorschach test. This test got very popular in the 1960s as a way to understand aspects of patients' personalities. And so you show somebody something, and then they give you a reaction. This is sort of the simplest form of a quick experiment. Well, what's a great quick usability experiment? Again, we're trying to figure out, are we confusing the user? So I'm going to slightly move you from psychology into the physical world and into technology. Can they accomplish their task? It's usually testing one flow. So what's quick here in usability? Well, one flow is this dining room table that I was creating, that I was planning in my house. How wide would it be? What was the length of it? How far from the ground? Everything was built with cardboard. I had family members sit around the table to test this out. So again, this quick experiment of building it in cardboard rather than in wood, where it was really expensive, led us to understand all the parameters, the usability of this item. And then we were able to build this table. So usability experiments are really valuable. If you can do them quickly, you can learn before you spend all the time in engineering and building. So what's another form of experiment that's quick? Well, I'm going to show you a backlog prioritization experiment. So when we talk about the theory and the practicality, this is a lot of fun here. Let's say you've got a lot of items in your backlog, and I can tell you that the various frameworks for prioritization aren't that useful because you're often making up numbers for what's the impact, what's the confidence, what's the effort. If you do some discovery about the ideas, do some user testing, you can learn about the priority with respect to your customer's value. Do they want this thing? That's really what we're interested in. So let's go talk to users, backlog prioritization. So we got multiple items. How can we do rapid discovery to find out which one will produce the most value? Okay, so we have to put ourselves, this is a thought experiment in itself. I want you to pretend that you work for Zoom and that you have thought of a bunch of ideas for improving breakout rooms. I teach these classes at Berkeley. They have 30 students in them. Each team is 3 people. So often in my classes, I have 10 breakout rooms for 5 to 10 minutes. And I need to decide, I'd love to have more tools to help me manage and improve. So one experiment is, let's say I'm a Zoom user and I've got Zoom on my phone, and Zoom starts sending me push messages to gauge my interest. So I call these micro prototypes. So Zoom, let's read this text here. Zoom now offers advanced features to manage the success and health of breakout rooms. I can gauge whether somebody's interested in breakout room improvements right away. Would they swipe to learn? Would they dismiss? Have them talk about it in front of you. So this is a moderated interview. I show this either I'm with them, and this is a prototype, or that's on a computer screen and over Zoom, actually talking about Zoom. I show a different idea. Zoom now offers the ability to listen into a breakout room without having to enter it. A new feature, see who has video turned on or off in breakout rooms without having to enter them. Okay. New feature, for breakout rooms, Zoom shows you which rooms are the quietest and which rooms have the most people talking. Again, you may not be the product manager for Zoom breakout rooms or Zoom itself. What I'm encouraging you to do is to think of the ideas in your backlog and quick ways to explain them to users and to get their interest. Let the users help you with quick experiments, decide what to work on. Backlog prioritization. I did this with a client. They worked with educational technology. We went into a classroom and we showed a variety of ideas. And the team was able to hear the excitement and understand the response as to which of these ideas was most valuable. So you too can go in to your target customers with something simple, almost like a marketing prompt, just to gauge value. Then you can start to build bigger prototypes on it. So try the micro prototype idea. Okay, so again, we were really small with these micro prototypes. What do I see in the market? Lots of stuff. People testing too much, creating these end-to-end experiences. So what I want you to do, I want you to not test the entire experience. I want you to pick a piece of that experience to innovate. This is an e-commerce flow. How about just picking add to cart and really testing something like that? So again, we can be quicker if we can focus. You can certainly test each of these other aspects, but to be quick, you want to test them one at a time, not in these mega testing sessions. I also want you to start with a vertical slice. So what is really valuable about that add to cart area? Can you launch something? Can you, from end to end, deliver a piece of value quickly? So when I say quick, you may have a vision of that the entire product that is reflected in that left pyramid that's full. What I really want you to do is iterate with these vertical slices. Okay. When I say quick, what does that mean? What time frame am I talking about? Here's a 1 quarter timeline where you learn over a 4 to 6 week period by testing these 4 prototypes. You build it and you launch it, and then you do some measurement. This is not an example. Science, everyone's going to have to tailor this around. This is not one size fits all, like Rory said. But what this is a way to think about what quick means. Some people in the gaming companies or in Google search might be testing multiple things a day, right? But here in that learn phase, you're running through quick experiments to figure out what is working and what's valuable. So let's move on to experiments. You're doing great. We got to innovate. We've got quick. Now let's do experiments. So again, solution first versus experiment first. In the solution first world, you've got that one long flow and you just build it. No testing. Experiment first is this respect for the market that may be able to help you figure out what's actually working well. Multiple flows, evaluating, maybe building. Okay. So let's take something where we've got multiple flows. We make a compare and contrast moment that reveals the user's choice. And then if I were to pull this all together, when I have multiple flows with experiments, I'm actually bringing more of those sketched ideas, more of those ideas from my team to the user. So there's more room for innovation if I'm putting more ideas into the market more often. So innovation can often be a quantity game. So here we go. I had you focus down to the add to cart. Well, what does experiment mean? Experiment means give me 3 add to cart experiences. Could be 4, could be 5. I've tested up to 7 experiences in a half an hour. It depends on what you're testing. What is valuable to the users? Is it a cross-sell? Is it an upsell? Is it a discount coupon? Is it a service offering? But you're going to add these multiple options in. And what experiments do is they help you avoid confirmation bias. When you offer no choices to users, effectively, you're saying, hey, choose this thing. When you offer choices, you're being open-minded. And as you're open-minded, the idea from that data scientist might really come through as the winner, or the doctor that you put on the team. It doesn't have to be the product manager, doesn't have to be the designer. In fact, the engineer might come up with the idea that the user selects. So as we go from big to small, you have this big flow you want to test. This is an analytics experience. Well, let's just try that dashboard. You still have a lot going on in that dashboard. Let's pick one of these graphics. Is this visualization driving value? Some of you might be analytics PMs out there. Go to the next level is now I want to take that and I want you to create multiple options. And that's what brings the experiment aspect in. So to recap this, you start with that one little module there and you do some experimentation. This is where you're going to build an incredible product one piece at a time, rather than this big bang testing where you are doing long experiments that really never get off the ground. So let's pull it all together. So let's do Innovate, quick, and experiments. I'm going to show you something, and then we'll be out of here. This is great. Zoom breakout rooms. This is a link. You can go look at this prototype and play with it yourself. This is just an example of giving 3 options and a compare and contrast that I built myself in Figma. This is how easy it is with Figma. It's a great tool. There are lots of other tools you can prototype with. So here's a scenario of a bunch of folks. I'm going to put them into breakout rooms. Then I have to figure out which one to visit. And I'm just giving you a screenshot because we're in a presentation situation, but this would be an option. This would be a flow that someone would play with. Option 1 shows these items. Option 2 shows some videos that are on and off. Option 3 has no videos, but it does offer me the ability to listen in. And listening in to Zoom breakout rooms without people knowing it sounds creepy. It's also one of the most highly selected options when I give this prototype to folks. So, and then at the end, there's a compare and contrast moment. So again, this is the way you pull these quick, this is about how you innovate with quick experiments, is to make these things that aren't pixel perfect, but get your point across. Okay, so closing out here, don't settle for blah feedback. I like this, that's interesting. This is all kind of meh feedback. This is not what you want. People are being nice to you. I want to hear, ooh. I want to hear, oh, wow. I want to hear, is this available? I want that emotional reaction. Users, a mindset, content, prototypes, these make great experiments. I really encourage you to get out there and innovate with quick experiments. I've done a lot of writing on solution test interviews. So really check this out. And again, hey, stay in touch. Thanks for listening. And here's my LinkedIn, my Twitter, and you can reach out to me through Rory. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you very much, Jim. And just as you were going through your kind of experiments with Zoom, I've realized we were getting spammed a bit, and I tried to block it, and I realized it popped up on the screen. So that's a feature for this system, that when you try to block a chat message, it ends up publishing it instead. Apologies for that brief interruption. But no, I really like that presentation. Some great examples there. And there was 2 kind of things that jumped out to me that I wanted to ask about. The first being, with those kind of fake door type of, or like those push notifications, the feedback, and when I've tried to push those in organizations, is that will damage our reputation. So if we do that, we have to go out to market with a perfectly polished offering, and we can't go out with anything small or micro. How do you deal with that kind of a reaction from people?
Yeah. I find the world in general, in consumer and in business, to be more accepting of works in progress, just in general, over the 7 years I've been on my own, plus before that. So I also think that you can run those types of push messages just in a fake prototype interview. You don't necessarily have to actually put them out in the app. But for companies that really want to get more of a statistical form of evidence, rather than the evidence that I was gathering maybe in prototypes, would be to actually send those push messages out. And my sense is that people understand that people are doing market research, and that really what you're trying to do is involve them as a partner. So that may be an extreme version if you were to actually publish those 4 push messages. But what I encourage you to do is to involve your customers upstream to help you make choices, and to fight against that branding conflict, because people actually want you to get better as a company. And if you don't listen to folks, which means actually talking to them and sharing ideas, it's going to be really hard.
That's great. I do know some marketing folk that will take a little bit of convincing, but no, it is a great point that you want that conversation, that communication, two-way communication. The other one that I think was Kevin asked online, how do you push for better communication? So you said don't settle for meh, but what happens when you're getting meh? Like, what do you do to try and get to that better feedback?
Yeah, I'm trying to stretch my teams. My teams are putting out compare and contrast moments that are more like usability tweaks, like should the buttons be blue or should the buttons be red? My sense when you're getting blah feedback is that you're not trying hard enough. You're not stretching, you're not encouraging or desiring failure. And so ideally you'd get to a point where people are like, oh no, I don't want this. You need to probe in the design phase, with design prototypes, probe how far your user's interest and value goes. And my sense is that you may need to add more people to the team. You may need to add more exercises such as visual brainstorming, like the sketching. There are lots of creativity exercises to get teams to put up more ideas. But quantity of ideas, quantity of testing, you're going to get to points, and I see it with business software as well. People say, ooh, people want their business software to work well, not just their consumer software.
Excellent. All right, well, that takes us to time, but I really enjoyed the talk, and thanks for sharing all of your insights, and I love the examples as well. It really brought it home for me. So thank you very much, Jim.
Cool. Thanks, Rory.
Thank you. So up next, we have Kevin Philpott, who will be talking about Blitz research, more insights in less time. And Kevin is the head of UX at Pi Insurance. So welcome, Kevin.
Hey, everyone. And, Jim, that last presentation, I couldn't have planned better and is like such a perfect setup for this, because I think what you did is you talked through the macro process of how you can kind of speed up and descale your experiments, right? And I'm going to go kind of deep in the weeds now of like, I'm a practical UX person, and how do I cut down some of this time if I don't have it as I would like sometimes to do my research, right? So this is an absolutely ideal setup. So thank you for that.
Great. And so if you can just share your screen, I'll publish it now.
We'll kick it off. Let's do this. All right, let's make sure you are getting that. All right. Can you see that? Great.
I can. Right. So I'm going to leave you now and I'll publish this. So see you shortly. And best of luck.
Love it. Cool. Hey folks, so today we're going to talk about Blitz research, which is really just a fancy phrase for how can you do research faster, right? Which of course we always want to do everything faster. And I'm going to go through kind of the 5 areas that I've found helpful in terms of cutting down a research timeline. As a bit of background, my name's Kevin Philpott. I'm head of UX at Pi Insurance. I've worked as in design leadership in other companies and done that for various different organizations like Geico Loans, IBM, and I'm on a number of tech councils, UX councils, work regularly publish on Forbes, George Washington University and Richmond University advisory groups. I'm not teaching at Berkeley. I did read a book that mentioned Berkeley once, but that's about as close as I get there to Jim, unfortunately. And you might have heard me doing a couple of talks in a bunch of various different places, or maybe annoying you with a post on LinkedIn that got shared with you, right? But let's get right into what are we actually going to learn? What are you going to get out of this, right? I'm going to talk about the value of having an alignment meeting when you're doing your research. We're going to talk about how you can look at existing data to speed up how you do your research. Do we have some information on this already? We're going to talk about unmoderated research methods. We're going to talk about spending less time designing. And I'm going to share a couple of what I would call project management power phrases, which sounds very fancy altogether now that I read that out loud. But basically some things that you can say in meetings that can help move things on a little bit, right? Caveat, there's no silver bullet, right? I'm not going to stand up here today and say that if you need to do a project and it requires research, and it actually requires 2 days worth of research, that you can cut that down to 1 hour. You cannot, probably, right? But this is a little bit of a discussion thinking about the context that we talked about earlier, where you have all of these different actors in your organization, engineers, product, multiple projects, and juggling different timelines, right? So sometimes you just don't have the exact amount of time that you would like to do your research, right? And some research is better than none. So sometimes you have to get creative. And these are some things that I've used myself over time that have helped me cut down the time that I spend on research, right? Sometimes when somebody asks you to do some research in an amount of time that is impossible, you will have to say no to that, right? There is not a one-size-fits-all solution for this, of course, right? But with that caveat, let's go into our first item, which is having an alignment meeting. Okay, so this might seem like more time, but I can tell you from personal experience that 30 minutes of an alignment meeting can sometimes save you 30 hours later on or more, right? What are you doing in an alignment meeting? You're setting expectations with all the different various stakeholders that would be interested in this piece of research, right? About what are you trying to achieve? How much time do you actually have to do it, so that you don't get a bunch of scope creep additional questions that come in at the end. You've kind of set that expectation that maybe we've only got like 2 or 3 days to do this, right? You can even set up the expectation that folks are not going to get a super nice PowerPoint presentation, well-designed, with lots of videos spliced together, right? It can be a verbal readout if you need to do it faster, right? It can be just bullet points. So long as your group know that's coming, that's often quite acceptable, right? And you can waste a lot of time actually documenting your research and not moving towards the outcomes for the business that you're actually trying to move towards, I've found. You want to bring in a representative from each stakeholder group that will be viewing or is interested in your research. Part of that is just it makes it better, right? From an integrative thinking perspective, what that really means is you are, for example, bringing in sales and seeing what they really want to get out of this. You're bringing in service, you're seeing what they really want to get out of this. You're thinking about your research from the customer and seeing what they really want to get out of this, right? And when you go through that exercise, sometimes you find these really nice synergies, and you're really trying to maximize the value of the piece of research you're doing across all those different stakeholders. You're not going to be able to please everyone all of the time, but if you go through that exercise, you often kind of get out in front of this person wanted this from the research, instead of getting that at the end when you're presenting the research or halfway through, right? It's helpful to share the goal of the research. You can send it in writing afterwards if you want, with a summary of the alignment meeting, to make sure that everyone remembers once you get to the end what was agreed to. It's very helpful to have a business case. The reason it's helpful to have a business case, even if you are a UX designer, is you don't want your research to get reprioritized or canceled in the middle of it, right? That is, of course, going to be detrimental to your timeline, right? And even if you're in UX and you're sitting there and you're like, oh man, how am I going to put together a business case? Maybe you're in engineering, you're thinking the same thing, right? Just work with somebody else. You don't have to do it yourself, right? Somebody is requesting the type of work related to this research, right? Work with them. See if you can put together a business case about why you are interested in this area. And it really helps to try and quantify the value whenever you can, so that if it comes up, you have that. And many projects in many organizations don't actually have that quantified value. So you're just increasing the chances that it's not going to get canceled, right? In this alignment meeting, you will probably have a lot of folks adding different things that they want. And if you have a short amount of time, you probably can't do that. So in certain cases, you can kind of just say, yep, that's a great idea. Let's add that to our research backlog for the next iteration, right? Because you simply can't, on a short timeline, add in everything else. And you don't necessarily want to tell people no, because you may be able to do it in the future, but you want to tuck it away as something that we'll look at later on, we'll assess the value of, and we'll see if we can prioritize that, right? All right, you've had your alignment meeting. do you even really need to go and recruit people for your research, right? Maybe you already have the data that you need. Recruitment can take time, right? So you can check and get creative about the data sources that you can kind of consider that might answer your research question, right? It's surprising how many folks really don't know what data is available in other departments in the organization. Maybe not surprising. These are big behemoths of organizations in some places, right? But it's worth asking about things like recording calls, notes in customer relationship management systems like Salesforce. Is there an inbox with customer emails? And one of the really nice things about these types of things is that when you set up, say, for example, a user interview, you're really artificially creating that situation, right? And you're coming up with questions, you're trying to get people to imagine what they were doing. But these are like in the moment pieces of data, especially recorded calls. You can get some really great insights from those, I have found. Social media, right? If you're looking for opinions, you can use tools like Social Searcher or UVRX, and you can search to see what's being said about your company if that's something that you're interested in, or your company plus keyword if you're interested in perspectives about a certain thing that your company does, right? You can also look at session recordings. If you have tools set up like Mouseflow, Datadog, there's a whole host of them. You have tools that can record what users do online, right? And so you may just want to filter down from those recordings into key areas that you're interested in, and you might not need to do usability tests. You might be able to observe those and see from those recordings what the problem area is, right? Review websites are a good one as well too. If you're trying to see, for example, in a competitive analysis, not just what your competitor has, but what do people think about what your competitor has, right? You can go to review websites, right? Trustpilot, Yelp, G2.com, and you can look at your own company as well too. What are you finding? Are there recurring patterns and themes coming about that where you could improve your experience, right? Now, a lot of things that I'm talking about here, kind of like you can just do them, right? And the information's either there or it's not. But you can also be pretty proactive here if you want to set yourself up for success in the future, right? If you have a research archive, use it, look at it, search through it. If you don't have one, set one up. Dovetail I found to be a great tool for this. And it really is amazing how much research gets done because people weren't able to find a previous test, or it gets lost in some set of folders somewhere. So being able to store and have that information so you don't have to repeat research can actually be quite helpful. Feedback forms, if you can set those up on your website. Of course, you then may be proactively collecting some data around different parts of your digital experience that you can then go to afterwards instead of needing to start from scratch when a need arises, right? Quantitative data sources, marketing surveys. Your company may have some of those. You may Google online, basically third-party surveys related to the topic that you're interested in. That might give you some helpful information, right? And Jim talked about this. So delighted when he talked about this. Focus, right? You might not need to research everything. A really good example of this is you want to improve your digital experience. You might just want to go to your web analytics tool and look for drop-off in your funnel, in your experience flow, right? Using the same example, a shopping cart, maybe you find on a shopping flow, maybe you find on a certain page, you've got the majority of the drop-off, right? So you're not researching everything. You may be able to do a much more focused piece of research, and you're always really trying to descale the amount of research that you are doing to be just enough to make the decision that you want to make. Again, fits very tightly with some of the stuff that Jim was talking about. All right, we talked about recruitment of research participants sometimes taking time, and we're going to talk a little bit more about unmoderated methods. So unmoderated usability tests are basically usability tests. You typically buy a platform like usertesting.com or any number of platforms out there. There's tons of them. They often have a pool of participants. You can set up a test. Someone will pick up that test, and you have written the test script in advance, and they go through that themselves. There's a number of advantages to this. First off, if you're doing moderated tests where you have to talk the participant through, you have to do the calendar scheduling, figure that all out. This kind of happens on its own once you set it up when you do remote unmoderated usability testing. Tests can run in parallel. Depending on the type of participants and the type of testing that you're doing, it could easily happen, if you've got a very generic audience, that you have multiple tests going on at the same time and uploaded in the matter of a couple of minutes. Now, usually I would say you want, like for most tests, at least in my experience, if you've got a general audience, you kind of want to give it a day or 2 days, right? So I'd also say if you're under time pressure, over-recruit by 2 users in these tests. There's a lot of professional testers out there at the moment, right? People that are just kind of like faking the tests to get paid the money, right? And if you're really under time pressure, you want to account for that a little bit, not have to get to the end and then kind of redo the test and launch it again or whatever it is, right? So if you really care about speed, you might want to over-recruit a little bit for that, right? Keep it simple, right? One of my favorite usability tests is to start people on Google or on a blank page, right? A blank page is better because you're not leading the folks as to what search method to use or where to start. And you just ask them, go ahead and do X. Now, one of the benefits of an unmoderated remote usability test is that you can't interfere with that test. You can't ask questions like you could in a moderated session that might give you different behaviors than if people just went and did it themselves, right? Another really great thing about this type of test here is often people focus on the experience of their products in the context of just their own product. Like they'll start people in their own quote flow, for example, right? But really, some of the best information I've found is you start people and you see where they shop and who they look at, even before they get to your experience. What are the things that they're thinking about in the broader context before they even get to you, right? So this is a super simple usability test, and it's super, super valuable, right? So it's a good example of something that you can set up, run, potentially get feedback within a day or two. And that, of course, is helpful and easier than taking potentially a week or 2 weeks to recruit people to come in and do some sort of moderated testing. What I've also found with unmoderated tests, if I want to be really, really efficient with this, is maybe I'm looking for a certain type of experience that people are having, a certain problem, right? You can add a little bit of a post-test question to say something like, briefly describe what you like least about your experience or you like most about your experience. And if you're running a bunch of these tests, that can help you really kind of identify, without watching necessarily all of the videos, which one you want to look at. Now, there's a big difference between what people say and what people do. So obviously, the ideal scenario is that you actually watch the videos that you are putting out there, right? But if you're under extreme time pressure, this might at least help you prioritize which ones you want to look at first, right? Unmoderated interviews, right? A lot of these usability testing platforms as well too, you can just change it up a little bit and basically get unmoderated interviews, right? So here's an example from Try My UI. You could do this with a bunch of other tools though, right? And I might start this out with the scenario of, we will begin this session on a blank page and you will be asked a series of questions about insert your experience here, right? Then think about a recent time when you did this experience. Please describe that process from start to finish in detail. What did you like about that? What did you dislike? What would you like to have changed about that experience? Is there anything else you might want to add, right? So that again is a super simple test around an experience that you might want to kind of explore, right? And you can launch that again unmoderated and get those results back potentially very quickly. The other thing that I'll just call out here is I've used userinterviews.com for recruitment when I've needed to go for kind of a more niche audience. Some of these platforms like usertesting.com or TryMyUI tend to have like quite generic users, right? Like a general population. If you're trying to go after, I don't know, doctors or small business owners, you might need to go for a more targeted approach. I found userinterviews.com to be good for that. You can set up your screener. They're really pretty quick. You might get results back in a day or two for that. So that can be an option if your need is a little bit more niche. If you have very niche needs, that does tend to take you longer to get that recruit set up, and it can cost you more, right? There's, of course, all sorts of different ways that you can try and get around that, like maybe going to conferences and trying to test people at those conferences, right? But it is certainly a more difficult task if you have a very niche need. One thing I'll also say is if you are exploring different partners for recruitment, a really good question to ask them is if they have recruited this type of user before. It is not ideal to enter a relationship with a recruitment provider where it's their first time trying to figure out how do you get these people. That can, of course, extend your timeline. All right, so that's unmoderated interviews. All right, and that looks like a mistake. All right, less time designing. You could test with low fidelity wireframes. Certain concepts, you don't need to have everything built out to the nth degree of fidelity, right? Sometimes you can get some really good feedback with that, right? Another thing that you can do, again, this requires you to be a little bit more proactive, but having design systems, right? You might not have to design everything out high fidelity because you are, you already have basically the components on your website, right? And so having a design system either coded, which is what I was just talking about, or even just a whole bunch of templates in Figma or whatever tool you're using, right? So that you can kind of just like copy and paste some of these bits and pieces and just edit them as you go. Again, that can save you a lot of time. You have to build that up, of course, but it's much better than designing from scratch. Last one here. I'm going to talk about some phrases you can use to help you move things along, right? Instead of saying, when can you, stakeholder, get me this piece of information that I need for my research or make a decision? Ask, how soon can you? Because that puts the emphasis on this is actually urgent and I need this. Give me the earliest possible time that I can get it. Sometimes also you'll be in a meeting and you'll be trying to gain consensus, right? And a phrase that is super helpful, I've found, is based on what we have observed. You might state what those observations are. I hypothesize we should trial X. You make the suggestion on how to move forward, unless there are any violent objections. And there are actually a lot of things going on here that make this an effective way to communicate. First, you're starting with based on what we have observed, right? The evidence, right? You're now not introducing your own opinion into this necessarily. I hypothesize, so you're not saying, hey, this is definitely the best way to go. It's just a hypothesis to test. Sometimes when you're very definitive, people can get defensive about that and can start a whole conversation. And unless there are any, next thing then is like you're putting forward a path of action, right? And then others can kind of chime in on that, right? You're not waiting for the group to come up with something. And the last thing is, unless there are any violent objections, there'll always be like little things that could be done better, right? But you're kind of saying, hey, group, this is what we're going with, unless there are any big objections. And that's often a good way to kind of move the group forward. Another one is just making sure you kind of set those expectations and timeframes, right? As a next step, we'll meet with whoever and whoever by Y date to determine Z, right? Make sure you're setting that expectation for the next step. Too often people leave meetings and it's like, oh man, like actually we should have said what we were going to do next when we were in that meeting. And you can just keep up a nice cadence each time of always setting the next deadline to keep the project moving forward. Last one is you will all at some point run into the scenario, which is you're looking for some confirmation or feedback online, right? It could be through Slack, it could be through your emails, and there's a group of different people, right? When you ask for that feedback, obviously you want to put in a date there. Sometimes if you don't put in a date, it'll just drag on, right? But even sometimes when you put in a date, it just, and you're not really assertive about the timeline on it, it'll just go on. It'll drag on and people do other things and they don't respond, right? If you're in a group chat, you can say, please review this thing by this date and let me know if you object before we proceed, right? That means if you get a non-response by that date, you can move forward. Are there going to be people that get upset with that? Yes, of course. There are, again, no silver bullet here, but it's a much more effective way often than just letting decisions sit out there and not being able to move your project forward, right? And so that is all the stuff that I wanted to run through with you guys today. I'm on LinkedIn. Again, you might have been annoyed by some of my posts in the past, right? If you search Kevin Philpott, which is a fairly unique name, you will find me for sure. And, feel free to check me out. If you have questions, feel free to connect with me and ask them. And this has been absolutely delightful. I'm at the end and I'm going to hand back over.
Great. Thank you very much, Kevin. Another great presentation for tonight. And yeah, don't worry. I think LinkedIn is a fair game for everybody to send out their posts. So I wouldn't be worried if you're annoying anybody.
I'm not. Just to be super clear about that. Absolutely not worried.
Great. There's a couple of things came up just as you were going through your presentation there. Thought it'd be good to ask. So you mentioned, and the first thing that you started with, and I thought it was a good point, is the alignment meeting. Now, you mentioned one thing that I thought was interesting there was that you're going to get people giving their pet ideas, or they want to get their kind of whatever they can get put in. So at that point, do you have a very clear, I was a little confused about, do you have a very clear objective, or is this more of a discovery of what are you going to research? And if it's the latter, then how do you effectively say no to people? Or are you taking everything on board?
So ideally, you have some sense of what you want to do or what the business value of this request is going in. I would say one thing that is super helpful as a designer in general is anytime somebody comes with a request, that the business value is accompanied with it, right? That will filter out a lot of requests, right? And then when you have that, when you go into the meeting, you've got a very specific thing that you would like to do. It is, of course, more challenging if you get into that and it's kind of super exploratory and you kind of have to direct the conversation. I've done those as well too. I think what you have to do in those types of situations is you listen to the opinions and then you suggest based on that what you think the research should be and try and corral that conversation into this is what we would like to achieve, right? If there are other things that come up, you might decide to prioritize those, stack rank them and say, cool, first what we're going to do is we're going to look at how we might understand the most important thing. And then you can kind of deflect some of those questions to be like, okay, that's good. Let's get to that after we figured out how we want to do this, or let's put this in our backlog. But it's certainly more difficult and it's an art that you practice over the years.
Great. I'm just hearing backlog prioritization, stack ranking. I wonder, do we get Jim back in here to suggest some quick experiments?
Absolutely.
Yeah, the other one, so I guess moving on to data, one thing I'm always a bit fearful of just relying on, because you gave some examples there of, I guess it could be people calling in, call center, or maybe some CRM. The negative feedback tends to outweigh the positive. In that kind of, when people are happy, they feel less of a need. Some people do, and it's fantastic when you receive that positive feedback. But the majority of the time, it's people who are negative. And do you feel that maybe you're getting biased in your opinions because 99% of people are quite happy, and then you've got this vocal 1%?
So, I mean, I think bigger picture, you're always trying to triangulate your research methods, right? So if you have information from surveys that kind of can suggest what the overall level of satisfaction is, then you can go into the research understanding that and knowing that, right? The other thing is that often you're kind of going in and you want to understand more about a phenomenon, or you want to understand more about opportunities to improve, right? And you've done a bit of research, hopefully, right? You can kind of, after a little bit of time, tell, is this an outlier, or is this something that kind of comes up pretty frequently, right? And it can be helpful to just understand in depth that single case, see if you see patterns across, as opposed to just one particular instance of it, right? And even if it's not like a massive problem for other users, it could still end up being a benefit or a delighter for them, right? So I think you just have to go into the research with the right frame of mind in terms of how you're actually going to interpret or communicate that data afterwards to be kind of be responsible about that.
Great. And yeah, the last thing is more a comment than a question, but there was a whole heap of different tools that you mentioned throughout there. So I guess actually, is there something that you would recommend for people who don't have access to those tools, getting budget or getting sign off and approval for? Is there a business case there, or how would you suggest for people to move forward there?
Yeah, I mean, so those tools can be incredibly expensive. Usertesting.com. So you can have, there's cheaper versions of those tools, right? So that's one way you can approach it. If you need to build the business case as to why those tools can be important, sometimes what you unfortunately have to do is start without those tools. And you show how long it takes to do this on your own. You can calculate the cost over time of how much it is taking you as a designer to do this type of stuff, right? And also from a business perspective, it's deeply unsatisfying each time to have to wait like potentially 2 to 3 weeks to get insights on your stuff. And that's if you're really kind of planning it out, if you're doing that type of recruitment manually, right? So one thing to do is to kind of take what you're currently doing, record the cost of it, record the time it takes, record your time as a cost, and try and make the business case that way, right? Because some of these tools, again, they're not all super, super expensive. And you can sometimes put down on paper like, hey, look, we could pay for this, or I can keep doing this. And it kind of makes the decision for itself almost.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. We've unfortunately run out of time, but again, really enjoyed your presentation, and I hope everybody watching took a lot of value. So thank you very much.
Love it. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of our session today, but just wanted to do a shameless plug at the end. We are doing our main conference in the USA in May, and we'll be physically present in New York City in the New World Stages for those of you who are in that part of the world. Tickets are on sale now, so if you did enjoy the conversations that we had today, but you just want to experience that in person and much larger, covering all 4 of our core areas of product, UX, design, and dev, and focused on how teams can actively move from working in that project world to a more product team world. But thank you very much for joining in, and look forward to seeing you again soon. And thanks again once more to Jim and Kevin for sharing their knowledge today. So thank you very much.